Three children smile in an old photograph. Two white, one black, all dressed in expensive clothes. All sitting together like friends. But look closer at the black child's wrists. Those marks you see, they're scars from shackles. This isn't a photograph of friendship. This is evidence of a crime that history tried to hide. And when one researcher discovered the truth behind this image, he uncovered a story so dark, so twisted, that it would shake an entire family's legacy to its core. This is the true story of Samuel Rose, the boy who was forced to smile while wearing chains. The antique shop in Charleston smelled of old wood and forgotten memories. Marcus Williams had been browsing for over an hour, searching through estate sale items with the practiced eye of someone who knew what to look for. As a researcher for the Equal Justice Initiative, Marcus had spent 20 years documenting the legacy of slavery in America. He'd seen thousands of historical documents, photographs, and artifacts, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to find. Half hidden behind a stack of depression glass, Marcus spotted a small daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame. Something about it caught his attention, a whisper of wrongness that made his instincts scream. He picked it up carefully, wiping dust from the glass. The photograph showed three children, probably between 8 and 10 years old, sitting together on an ornate garden bench. Two white children, a boy and a girl with blonde ringlets, flanked a black child in the center. All three wore expensive clothing that spoke of wealth and status. The white boy in a tailored suit with a bow tie, the girl in an elaborate dress with lace trim, the black child in equally fine clothes, a pressed white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that matched the white boy's. What struck Marcus immediately was how comfortable they looked together. The children were smiling, genuine smiles, not the rigid formality typical of 1850s photography. Their bodies were close, relaxed. The white girl had her hand resting on the black child's shoulder. The white boy leaned in slightly, as if they'd been laughing just before the photographer captured the moment. At first glance, it appeared to be a touching testament to childhood friendship transcending racial barriers in the antebellum South. The kind of image that suggested innocence, that perhaps children of that era could see beyond the prejudices of their parents. But Marcus had learned never to accept such images at face value. He held the frame up to the shop's dim lighting, studying it more carefully. The photograph was dated on the back in faded ink. Summer 1854, Charleston. A photographer's stamp read Whitmore Studios. Marcus examined each child's face carefully. The white children looked relaxed, happy, but the black child's smile, there was something wrong about it. It didn't quite reach his eyes. Behind that practiced expression lurked something else, something Marcus couldn't quite define. Weariness, perhaps, or fear masked by a performance of happiness. And then Marcus saw it. The black child's sleeves had ridden up slightly on both arms. Around each wrist, barely visible in the photograph's sepia tones, were marks, discolored bands of skin that suggested long-term abrasion, scarring. Marcus's hands began to shake. He'd seen similar marks before in historical photographs and medical documents. They were the unmistakable evidence of shackles worn for extended periods, the kind of marks left when metal restraints are worn for months, rubbing against flesh during sleep, during movement, during desperate attempts to escape. This wasn't a photograph of three friends playing together. This was something far darker. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears as the full horror of what he was holding became clear. This was a carefully staged image that documented a nightmare, even as it tried to present an illusion of harmony and care. A black child, enslaved, shackled, traumatized, forced to smile for the camera alongside his captor's children. Made to perform friendship while chains scarred his wrists. The shopkeeper asked if he wanted to purchase it. Marcus could barely speak. Yes, he managed. How much? $30. Marcus paid cash with trembling hands and walked directly to his car. He sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, unable to start the engine, staring at the photograph under better light. Using his phone's camera, he zoomed in on the black child's wrists. The marks were definite, and now that he was looking more carefully, he noticed other disturbing details. The black child sat slightly forward on the bench, as if ready to stand at a moment's notice. His posture, despite the smile, was deferential. His clothing, while expensive, was slightly too large, handed down perhaps, or purchased without careful fitting. This child was enslaved. Marcus was certain of it. dressed in fine clothes and posed with his enslavers' children as if they were equals, but marked by the chains that defined his actual status. Someone had staged this photograph to present slavery as benign, to suggest that enslaved children were treated well, cared for, even loved. But the evidence of violence was literally visible on this child's body. Marcus needed to know who these children were, what had happened to them, and why someone had commissioned this particular photograph. He started his car and headed back to his office in Montgomery, Alabama, already planning the research that would consume the next months of his life and uncover secrets that a powerful family had tried to bury for 170 years. Back at the Equal Justice Initiative's Research Center, Marcus set up the daguerreotype under high-intensity lights and photographed it from every angle. The digital images revealed details invisible in casual viewing. The marks on the black child's wrists became even more apparent under magnification. Bands of lighter skin approximately 1 inch wide on each wrist, with subtle scarring visible along the edges. Marcus had documented similar injuries in his research. Enslaved children who were shackled developed these characteristic marks. The skin would lighten where metal pressed constantly against flesh, and scar tissue would form where the shackles rubbed during movement or struggle. He began with the photographer's mark, Whitmore Studios, Charleston, 1854. Historical directories showed that Edward Whitmore had operated a successful photography business in Charleston from 1851 to 1863, catering to wealthy families who could afford the expensive daguerreotype process. Whitmore had advertised family portraits of distinction and children's likenesses captured with artistic sensitivity. Marcus found dozens of examples of Whitmore's work in archives and museum collections. The photographer had a distinctive style: outdoor settings when possible, natural poses, attention to clothing, and background details that signaled his subject's wealth and status. Many of Whitmore's portraits included enslaved servants in the background, positioned to demonstrate the family's prosperity. But this photograph was different. The enslaved child wasn't in the background. He was centered, positioned between the white children dressed as finely as they were. This wasn't about displaying wealth through the number of servants. This was something else, something darker. Marcus contacted colleagues at the Charleston Museum and the South Carolina Historical Society, sending them high-resolution images of the photograph. He barely slept, obsessed with finding answers. Within 2 days, he received a response from Dr. Patricia Green, a historian specializing in antebellum Charleston families. The email made his blood run cold. "I believe I've identified the white children," Patricia wrote. "The clothing style and the Whitmore Studios connection led me to prominent Charleston families from 1854. I found a matching photograph in our collection, a formal family portrait taken the same year showing the Hartwell family, Colonel James Hartwell, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 children, William and Charlotte. The children in your photograph match William and Charlotte Hartwell perfectly." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He knew that name. Colonel James Hartwell had been one of Charleston's wealthiest plantation owners, with properties totaling over 2,000 acres. According to the 1850 census slave schedule, he'd owned 187 enslaved people. But Patricia's email continued with information that made Marcus's stomach turn. Here's what's truly disturbing. "I found a reference to this specific photograph in Eleanor Hartwell's diary, which was donated to our archives in the 1920s. She mentions commissioning Whitmore to photograph the children at play with their little companion. She doesn't name the black child, but she refers to him as always with them, and notes that William and Charlotte were quite attached to the boy." Patricia's analysis was chilling. There's something unsettling about the casual way she discusses this, as if it's completely normal for her children to play with an enslaved child while that child wore shackles. The photograph seems to have been staged to present slavery as benign, to show that enslaved children were treated as family members. But the evidence of violence is right there in the image. Marcus immediately requested copies of Eleanor Hartwell's complete diary. When the scanned pages arrived 3 days later, he cleared his schedule and locked himself in his office. What he was about to read would haunt him for the rest of his life. Eleanor Hartwell's diary painted a disturbing picture of how enslaved children existed in the lives of wealthy white families. simultaneously present and invisible, valued and utterly disposable. Marcus compiled every reference to the boy who appeared in the photograph with William and Charlotte. Each entry was more horrifying than the last. March 1853. William has become quite attached to the boy from the quarters. James says it's natural for children to play together, and the boy is well behaved and clean. I've instructed Mammy to ensure he's properly dressed when he comes to the house. The boy, never a name, just the boy. July 1853. Charlotte insists the boy join her lessons. I've allowed it, though of course he cannot learn to read or write. That would be illegal and dangerous. But he sits quietly while she practices her letters, and his presence seems to motivate her studiousness. Marcus continued reading, his hands clenched into fists. Then came December 1853, the entry that revealed everything. The boy attempted to run away last week. James was quite disappointed. We'd treated him well, allowed him privileges unusual for his station. James had him punished appropriately and fitted with restraints to prevent future incidents. The children were upset by the sight of it, so I've explained that discipline, while unpleasant, is necessary for the boy's own good and for the safety of our family. Marcus stopped breathing. Restraints. The word sat on the page like a bloodstain. The restraints Eleanor mentioned so casually were the shackles that had left permanent marks on the child's wrists. Marks still visible in the photograph taken 6 months later. He forced himself to keep reading. January 1854. The boy has adjusted to his restraints. He no longer struggles against them and has resumed his usual cheerful manner with the children. William asked why the boy must wear chains when he and Charlotte do not. I've explained that different rules apply to different people and that the boy's restraints are like a parent's loving guidance. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but necessary for proper development. Marcus felt sick. The psychological manipulation was staggering, teaching the enslaved child that his shackles were a form of care, teaching the white children that some people deserved chains while others deserved freedom, based solely on the color of their skin. But Eleanor never once wrote the enslaved child's name. In dozens of diary entries spanning years, he was always the boy or their little companion. This erasure was deliberate. Enslaved people weren't individuals with names and identities. They were property, described by function rather than personhood. Marcus needed to find this child's name. He had to pull him back from historical oblivion. He requested the Hartwell plantation records from the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. When the digital scans arrived, he spent 2 sleepless days reading through the dehumanizing language, searching for any child who might match the boy in the photograph. In the 1854 ledger, under house servants' children, he found an entry that made his breath catch. Samuel, male, approximately 9 years. Assigned to children's companion and lighthouse duties. Mother Rose, deceased 1852. Father unknown. Note, flight risk. Secured as of December 1853. Samuel. The boy finally had a name. Marcus traced Samuel's presence in the Hartwell records backward and forward. The documentation was sparse but devastating. Samuel had been born on the Hartwell plantation around 1845. His mother Rose had worked as a house servant until her death in 1852. Cause listed simply as fever, though Marcus knew the term covered everything from cholera to exhaustion to violence. After Rose's death, 7-year-old Samuel had been assigned to work in the main house. The 1853 ledger noted, Samuel shows intelligence and obedience. Assigned to attend Master William and Miss Charlotte to assist with their needs and provide companionship. Well suited for this duty. The language was chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. Samuel hadn't been invited to be the children's friend. He'd been assigned to them. His companionship was a form of labor. His entire existence was structured around serving white children barely older than himself. Then Marcus found the entry about Samuel's escape attempt. December 1853. Samuel apprehended 2 miles from property attempting flight. 15 lashes administered, fitted with wrist restraints to prevent future attempts. Restraints to remain until trustworthiness demonstrated. 15 lashes. Samuel had been 8 years old. Marcus stared at the photograph again with this new knowledge. Samuel's smile now seemed even more clearly forced. The performance of a child who had learned that appearing cheerful was necessary for survival. that showing the pain and terror he surely felt would result in more punishment. The white children's casual affection, Charlotte's hand on Samuel's shoulder, William's comfortable proximity, took on a different, sickening meaning. They likely did feel genuine fondness for Samuel. Children that age form real attachments, but their affection existed entirely within a power structure where they owned Samuel, where their father could have him whipped, shackled, or sold at any moment, where Samuel's needs, feelings, and personhood were irrelevant compared to their comfort and entertainment. Marcus found more references to Samuel through 1854 and 1855. The restraints remained on his wrists for at least 18 months, long enough to leave the permanent scarring visible in the photograph. During this entire time, he continued to serve as William and Charlotte's companion, playing with them, attending their lessons, accompanying them on walks around the plantation grounds, all while metal bit into his wrists. In 1856, the ledger entries about Samuel changed tone. Samuel, age 11, becoming unsuitable for house service, shows increasing sullenness and resistance to instruction. Recommend reassignment to fieldwork. Marcus knew what this meant. As Samuel grew older, as the trauma of his enslavement deepened, maintaining the performance of cheerful companionship became impossible. The Hartwells interpreted his natural human response to torture as sullenness and resistance. The final entry about Samuel appeared in October 1856. Samuel sold to Mr. Thomas Crawford, plantation owner, Mississippi. $650 proceeds recorded. Samuel had been 11 years old. He'd been sold away from the only home he'd known, from the graves of his mother and any other family, sent to Mississippi alone. The ledger recorded this transaction with the same clinical detachment used for selling furniture or livestock. Marcus searched Mississippi plantation records, trying to trace Samuel further. The trail went cold. Samuel disappeared into the historical void that had swallowed millions of enslaved people. Their names, stories, and fates never properly recorded, or recorded only as property transactions. Samuel was gone, erased, forgotten. Or so Marcus thought. 6 months after finding the photograph, Marcus opened a new exhibition at the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum in Montgomery. Childhood Under Slavery: The Hidden Truth in Family Photographs. The 1854 image of William, Charlotte, and Samuel was the centerpiece. Marcus had worked with conservators to create a large-scale reproduction that revealed every detail. Digital enhancement made the shackle marks on Samuel's wrists unmistakably clear, impossible to ignore or deny. Beside the photograph hung text panels explaining what viewers were seeing. This photograph was staged to present an image of innocent childhood friendship. The 3 children are dressed in expensive clothing and pose together as if equals. But look closely at the wrists of the black child. The marks you see are scarring from shackles. Metal restraints this 8-year-old boy was forced to wear after attempting to escape slavery. This child, whose name was Samuel, wasn't playing with the white children by choice. He was assigned to them as property, forced to perform companionship while enduring violence and captivity. His smile was coerced. His childhood was stolen. The exhibition included Eleanor Hartwell's diary entries, displayed alongside documentation of Samuel's attempted escape, his punishment, and his eventual sale to Mississippi. Interactive displays allowed visitors to explore the full context: the Hartwell family's wealth built on enslaved labor, the legal system that allowed children to be shackled and sold, the deliberate erasure of enslaved people's names and identities. Marcus had also created a section exploring what happened to the 3 children as they aged. Visitors could see photographs of William and Charlotte as adults, read their obituaries, learn about their prosperous, respected lives. William had attended college, managed plantations, served in the Confederate Army, married, had 5 children, died in 1903 at age 53, remembered as a pillar of Charleston society. Charlotte had married into wealth at 18, became known for her charity work, lived until 1911, died at age 65, praised as a lady of refinement and Christian virtue. Then visitors encountered a simple panel with Samuel's information. Samuel, born approximately 1845, sold away from South Carolina in 1856, further fate unknown. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. 2 children whose entire lives were documented and celebrated. 1 child who vanished into historical silence. The exhibition drew significant media coverage. Major newspapers ran features. NPR conducted interviews. News outlets discussed the photograph and its dark history. But the most significant response came 3 days after the opening. Marcus received an email that made his hands shake so badly he could barely hold his phone. Subject line: "I think I'm descended from the boy in your photograph." The sender: Grace Morrison, Jackson, Mississippi. Marcus read the email with tears streaming down his face. "My great-great-great-grandfather was a man named Samuel Rose. Family oral history says he was born enslaved in South Carolina around 1845 and was sold to Mississippi as a child. After emancipation, he took his mother's name, Rose, as his surname. He lived until 1923 and told his children and grandchildren about his time in Charleston, about being forced to serve as a companion to white children while wearing chains. He specifically mentioned being photographed with those children, dressed in fine clothes, made to smile while his wrists were scarred from shackles. My family has preserved his story for generations. When I saw the news coverage of your exhibition, I recognized his story immediately. That's my ancestor in your photograph. That's Samuel Rose." Marcus called Grace immediately. They spoke for 2 hours that evening. Grace was 63, a retired school teacher, the keeper of her family's oral history, stories passed down through 5 generations from Samuel himself. "He was traumatized by those years in Charleston," Grace explained, her voice heavy with inherited pain. "He told his daughter, my great-great-grandmother, that the worst part wasn't the physical violence, though that was terrible. The worst part was being forced to pretend he loved his captors. Being forced to smile and play and act cheerful with children who owned him, who could have him beaten or sold at any moment." Grace's voice broke. He said it made him feel like he was betraying himself, erasing his own humanity to perform for white people's comfort. He said white people had stolen his childhood twice, once by enslaving him and again by forcing him to pretend enslavement was acceptable, even pleasant. Samuel had been sold to a cotton plantation in Mississippi in 1856. Exactly as the Hartwell records indicated, the plantation owner, Thomas Crawford, had worked Samuel in the fields until the Civil War ended and emancipation came. After freedom, Samuel stayed in Mississippi. He'd worked as a sharecropper, then as a laborer on the railroads. He'd married, had 6 children, lived to age 78. He was bitter, Grace said quietly. "My great-great-grandmother said he rarely smiled in his adult life. The performance of happiness he'd been forced to maintain as a child had permanently damaged his ability to express genuine joy. Even with his own children, his own grandchildren, he struggled to show affection. The trauma was too deep." Grace had photographs of Samuel from later in his life. She sent them to Marcus immediately. The images showed an elderly black man with a stern, weathered face. Deep lines carved around his mouth. Eyes that held decades of accumulated pain and rage and grief. But what stopped Marcus's breath were Samuel's hands. In every single photograph, and there were dozens spanning 40 years, Samuel's hands were carefully positioned to show his wrists. The scars were still visible, even 60 years after the shackles had been removed. Lighter bands of skin, evidence that time couldn't erase. He insisted on that, Grace explained. Whenever someone took his photograph, he made sure his wrist scars were visible. He said they were proof of what had been done to him, proof that couldn't be erased or denied. He wanted evidence to survive him. Marcus wept. Samuel had understood something profound. Photographs could be used to erase truth, as the 1854 image had attempted to do by presenting slavery as benign. But photographs could also preserve truth if the subjects insisted on making their reality visible. Samuel's adult portraits, with their deliberate display of his scars, were testimony that countered the lie of the childhood photograph. Grace had more to share, and each revelation was more devastating than the last. Samuel talked about those white children specifically. He said the girl, Charlotte, used to cry when he was punished. She'd beg her parents not to hurt him, but she never tried to actually help him escape or oppose slavery itself. She just didn't want to witness the violence that maintained the system she benefited from. Grace's voice hardened. Samuel said that kind of selective sympathy was almost worse than outright cruelty. It made white people feel virtuous while doing nothing to change the conditions that caused suffering. Charlotte could cry for him while he was being whipped, then go back to playing with him the next day as if nothing had happened, as if his pain was temporary and unimportant. Samuel had tried to find his extended family after emancipation. He'd spent decades searching for siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, placing advertisements in black newspapers, writing letters to churches and aid societies throughout the South. He'd found a few distant relatives, but he never reconnected with his immediate family. The Hartwells had scattered them so thoroughly that the bonds couldn't be re-established, Grace said, her voice breaking again. They didn't just enslave my ancestors. They deliberately separated them, sold them away from each other, erased their connections and histories. And then they preserved their own family history meticulously, celebrating themselves as genteel Southerners while trying to erase every trace of the people they'd brutalized. Samuel had died in 1923 at age 78. He'd lived to see his children grow, his grandchildren born. But according to family stories, he'd never fully escaped the trauma of his childhood enslavement. He had nightmares until the day he died, Grace whispered. He'd wake up screaming, clawing at his wrists as if the shackles were still there. My great-great-grandmother said sometimes he'd sit for hours just staring at his scars, running his fingers over them, remembering. Marcus knew what had to happen next. Grace's family story needed to be part of the exhibition. Samuel's voice, preserved through 5 generations of oral history, needed to be heard alongside the photograph. Samuel Rose wouldn't be erased again. News of the exhibition and Grace's connection to Samuel reached Charleston quickly. The response from the Hartwell family was swift and predictably defensive. Catherine Hartwell Bennett, William's great-granddaughter and current president of the Hartwell Family Historical Society, sent Marcus a lengthy email that made his blood boil. While we acknowledge our family's complicated history, we believe your exhibition presents an unbalanced and anachronistic view of the past. The Hartwell family provided housing, food, and care for the enslaved people on their property, including the child in the photograph. Our ancestors were products of their time, operating within legal and social systems they didn't create. To judge them by modern standards is unfair and harmful to our family's legacy. The letter continued, arguing that the photograph actually demonstrated the family's kindness, that they'd allowed Samuel to dress well, receive education alongside their children, and be photographed as if he were their equal. Catherine suggested that the shackles Marcus had identified might be exaggerated or misinterpreted. Perhaps they were some other kind of mark or photographic artifact. She concluded, "We hope you'll consider presenting a more balanced view that acknowledges the complexity of the era and the genuine affection that existed between the Hartwell children and their companion." Marcus responded with a detailed email that included high-resolution images of Samuel's wrist scars, magnified to show every detail, Eleanor Hartwell's own diary entries describing Samuel's restraints and punishment plantation records, documenting his 15 lashes and the order to keep him shackled, Grace, Morrison's contact information, and an invitation for Catherine to hear directly from Samuel's descendants about the impact of her ancestors' kindness. He ended with a simple question. If your ancestors were so kind, why did they shackle an 8-year-old child? Why did they whip him? Why did they sell him away from his home at age 11? And why did they never once write his name in their carefully preserved family records? Catherine never replied to that email, but she did post a statement on the Hartwell Family Historical Society's website expressing deep disappointment that certain activists are using historical photographs to shame and attack families, rather than promoting reconciliation and understanding. The statement provoked fierce responses online. Historians pointed out that acknowledging historical atrocities wasn't an attack, it was truth-telling necessary for genuine understanding. Activists noted that the Hartwell family's desire for reconciliation required no accountability or acknowledgement of harm. Just a request that descendants of enslaved people stop bringing up uncomfortable facts. Descendants of other enslaved families came forward with similar stories. The pattern became clear. Wealthy Southern families had often staged photographs showing enslaved children dressed well, positioned close to white children, smiling for the camera. These images were created as propaganda to counter abolitionist claims that slavery was cruel, to present enslavement as benign, even beneficial. But when researchers examined these photographs closely, the evidence of violence was often visible. Scars, signs of malnutrition, body language that revealed fear and trauma. The controversy drove even more visitors to Marcus's exhibition. The photograph of Samuel with William and Charlotte became widely recognized, not as a charming image of childhood innocence, but as documentary evidence of slavery's psychological cruelty and the lengths enslavers went to normalize their violence. Marcus arranged for Grace to fly to Montgomery. He wanted her to see the exhibition, to stand before the photograph of her ancestor and know that his story was being told, his name was being said, his survival was being honored. When Grace walked into the exhibition space and saw the large-scale reproduction of the 1854 photograph, she stopped and began to weep. Marcus stood beside her silently, giving her space to feel everything she needed to feel. "He's so young," Grace whispered finally, staring at 8-year-old Samuel's face. "I've always known the story, but seeing his face, seeing how small he was, seeing those marks on his wrists." Her voice broke completely. He was just a baby, and they tortured him. They bought and sold him like furniture. They erased his name and his mother's memory and his entire humanity. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the image of Samuel's face. "But he survived," she said, her voice growing stronger. "He lived. He had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we're still here. We remember him. They tried to erase him, but he's more permanent than all their monuments and mansions. His truth outlasted their lies." Marcus expanded the exhibition to include Grace's family story. Samuel's adult photographs, with his scars deliberately visible, hung beside the childhood image. Visitors could trace his entire life. The enslaved child forced to smile, the elderly man who refused to hide his scars, the 5 generations of descendants who preserved his truth. 1 year after Marcus found the photograph, the Equal Justice Initiative organized a memorial service for Samuel Rose. The location, Charleston, in a park that had once been Hartwell plantation land. Over 200 people attended, historians, activists, descendants of enslaved people, and even a few descendants of enslavers willing to acknowledge their families' histories honestly. Grace stood before the crowd, holding a statement her family had prepared together. Her voice shook at first, then grew steady and strong. Samuel Rose was born into slavery around 1845. He was forced to labor from the moment he could walk. He was shackled as a child for the crime of seeking freedom. He was sold away from his home at age 11 and never saw South Carolina again. He survived the Civil War, Emancipation, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. He lived 78 years despite a system designed to destroy him. And he made sure his descendants would know his story, would remember his name, would understand what had been done to him, and what he had survived. For 140 years, the photograph of Samuel with William and Charlotte Hartwell was interpreted as a charming image of childhood innocence. Our family knew the truth, that Samuel had been in chains while that photograph was taken, that his smile was coerced, that every moment of his childhood with the Hartwells was defined by violence and captivity. But no one listened to our oral history. It took a researcher noticing the scars on Samuel's wrists for the truth to finally be acknowledged. Her voice rose with passion. "This is why we must preserve these difficult histories. This is why we must look closely at historical images that seem innocent and ask whose stories are being erased. This is why we must believe descendants of enslaved people when they tell us their family histories, even when those histories contradict comfortable narratives about the past." Samuel Rose existed. He mattered. He was a person, not property. He had a mother who loved him, a life that extended far beyond his years of enslavement, and descendants who carry his memory forward. The Hartwell family tried to erase him. They never used his name in their records. They sold him away. They celebrated their own history while denying his humanity. But he survived. We survived. And we're here today to say his name, to honor his life, and to ensure he's never forgotten again. Marcus unveiled the memorial marker, simple black granite engraved with Samuel's name, dates, and a brief inscription, Samuel Rose, born approximately 1845, enslaved as a child on this land, shackled, sold, but not broken. Remembered by those who carry his story forward, below the inscription was a reproduction of the 1854 photograph. But unlike the original, which had tried to hide the truth, this version included arrows pointing to Samuel's wrists and text that read, "The marks you see are scars from shackles." This child was enslaved. His name was Samuel Rose. After the ceremony, Marcus stood with Grace looking at the memorial. The land around them had changed dramatically since Samuel's childhood. The plantation buildings were gone, replaced by suburban development and this small park. But the history remained, marked now in a way that couldn't be ignored. "Do you think he would be satisfied with this?" Marcus asked quietly. With the memorial, the exhibition, his story finally being told? Grace considered the question carefully, her eyes never leaving the photograph of her 8-year-old ancestor. Samuel lived his entire adult life fighting to be seen as fully human, to have his experiences acknowledged. He faced people who denied slavery had been cruel, who insisted enslaved people had been content, who erased and minimized and justified the violence done to him. She touched the memorial gently. This memorial does what he spent his life trying to do. It insists on the truth. It names him. It acknowledges what was done to him. So yes, I think he would find some peace in this. She paused, then added with quiet intensity, "But I also think he'd want people to understand that remembering isn't enough. These histories aren't just past. They created systems and inequalities that persist today. Samuel's story matters not just because he suffered, but because understanding how slavery worked, how it was disguised and justified, how it damaged generations of black families is essential to addressing its ongoing legacy." Marcus nodded, thinking about all the work still to be done. The thousands of photographs are yet to be examined closely. The millions of enslaved people whose names had been erased. The descendant communities are still fighting for acknowledgement and justice. But today, at this moment, Samuel Rose was remembered. His face looked out from the memorial, no longer forced to smile, no longer erased, no longer silent. The photograph that had been created to hide the truth of slavery had become, through careful attention and the persistent voices of his descendants, testimony to that truth. Samuel had reached across 170 years through an image preserved in silver and glass. His scars, visible to anyone who looked closely enough, had finally told their story. The story of a child who was shackled, sold and silenced, but who survived, who lived, who made sure his descendants would remember, who refused to let history erase him. Grace stayed at the memorial long after the crowd dispersed, tracing her fingers over Samuel's name carved in stone. Marcus heard her whisper something, a promise or perhaps a prayer. "We remember you, Samuel. We will always remember you." And in that moment, Marcus understood the true power of what they'd accomplished. Not just documenting history, but restoring dignity. Not just preserving a photograph, but reclaiming a name. Samuel Rose had been erased from official records, sold like livestock, forced to smile while wearing chains. But his truth, preserved by his descendants, revealed by his scars, honored by this memorial, had outlasted all attempts to bury it. Some truths, Marcus realized, are too powerful to be buried forever. 3 years after discovering the photograph, Marcus received another email that would change everything once again. The subject line read, "I found more photographs of Samuel." The sender was a graduate student named Jennifer Chen, working on her dissertation about visual propaganda in the antebellum South. She'd been researching in the archives of a private collector in Virginia when she discovered a box of uncatalogued daguerreotypes from Charleston. 3 of them showed Samuel. Marcus's hands shook as he downloaded the images Jennifer had sent. The first photograph showed Samuel at about age 7. Before the escape attempt, before the shackles. He stood behind Eleanor Hartwell in a formal family portrait, wearing shabby clothes, his hands clasped in front of him. His expression was blank, carefully neutral. Even at 7, he'd already learned to make himself invisible. The second image was dated 1855, a year after the garden bench photograph. Samuel stood alone against a plantation outbuilding wall. He wore fine clothing again, but this time the photographer had made no attempt to hide the shackles. They were clearly visible on his wrists, thick metal bands connected by a short chain. But it was Samuel's face that haunted Marcus. No smile, no performance, just a direct, haunted stare at the camera. The eyes of a child who had given up pretending, who had nothing left to lose. The third photograph was the most devastating. It showed Samuel at about age 10 standing in a cotton field. He wore ragged work clothes now. The fine outfits were gone. His hands were raised slightly, wrists together. And even in the faded image, Marcus could see the thick scars that circled them like bracelets. But Samuel was looking directly at the camera with an expression Marcus had never seen in a photograph of an enslaved person from that era. Defiance. Raw, burning defiance. This photograph had been taken shortly before Samuel was sold to Mississippi. The Hartwells had documented his sullenness, his resistance. Here was the visual evidence. A child who refused to be broken even when everything had been taken from him. Marcus added all 3 photographs to the exhibition, arranging them chronologically. Visitors could now trace Samuel's complete transformation. The blank-faced 7-year-old, the shackled 8-year-old forced to smile, the 9-year-old with dead eyes who'd stopped pretending, the 10-year-old who stared at the camera with fierce, unbroken defiance. The exhibition became even more powerful. School groups visited. Documentaries were filmed. The photographs went viral on social media, with millions of people seeing Samuel's face and learning his name. But the most significant impact came from other descendants of enslaved people. Inspired by Grace Morrison's success in connecting with Samuel's story, dozens of families came forward with their own oral histories. They brought old photographs, faded documents, and stories passed down through generations. Marcus and his team created a database, working to identify enslaved individuals in historical photographs and connect them with living descendants. The project grew beyond anything Marcus had imagined. Within 2 years, they'd identified over 300 enslaved individuals in photographs previously thought to show only their enslavers. They'd connected with more than 100 descendant families. Each connection was a restoration. Each name recovered was a victory against historical erasure. Grace Morrison became an advocate for this work, traveling to speak at universities and museums. She carried Samuel's story with her everywhere, refusing to let people look away from the uncomfortable truth of American history. My great-great-great-grandfather spent his entire life trying to make people see what had been done to him, she would tell audiences. He displayed his scars in every photograph because he knew that physical evidence couldn't be denied. Now we have the technology and the will to look closely at historical images, to see what they reveal about the violence of slavery. She would pause, letting her words sink in. But seeing isn't enough. Acknowledging isn't enough. We must ask ourselves, what are we going to do about the systems and inequalities that slavery created? How are we going to repair the damage? That's the question Samuel's story demands we answer. The Hartwell family eventually issued a formal apology, not to Marcus or the exhibition, but directly to Grace and her family. It came 5 years after the memorial was dedicated and only after sustained public pressure. Catherine Hartwell Bennett read the statement at a press conference in Charleston. On behalf of the Hartwell family, I acknowledge the profound harm our ancestors inflicted upon Samuel Rose and countless other enslaved individuals. We recognize that our family's wealth and status were built on the systematic brutalization of human beings. We apologize to Samuel's descendants and commit ourselves to supporting initiatives that address the ongoing legacy of slavery. The apology was accompanied by a substantial donation to the Equal Justice Initiative and a commitment to open the Hartwell family archives to researchers studying slavery. Grace accepted the apology but made clear it was only a beginning. Apologies are words, she said. What matters is action. What matters is truth-telling that doesn't stop when it becomes uncomfortable. What matters is systemic change. Marcus continued his research, but Samuel's story remained the cornerstone of his work. The photograph that had started everything. The 3 children on the garden bench, the shackle scars barely visible on Samuel's wrists, became one of the most recognized historical images in America. It appeared in textbooks, in documentaries, in museums across the country, but always with Samuel's name, always with his full story, always with acknowledgement of the violence that photograph had tried to hide. 10 years after finding the photograph in that Charleston antique shop, Marcus stood once again at Samuel's memorial. It was the anniversary of the dedication, and a crowd had gathered, larger than the original ceremony. Grace was there, now 73, surrounded by 3 generations of her family. Samuel's descendants numbered in the hundreds now, scattered across the country, but many had come to Charleston for this day. A new addition to the memorial had been installed, a bronze statue depicting Samuel as a young man, free, his hands raised to show his scars not in shame but in testimony. The sculptor, a descendant of enslaved people herself, had captured something powerful in Samuel's expression. Pain and strength, sorrow and defiance, the determination to survive and to be remembered. At the base of the statue, new words had been added. They tried to erase me, but I am here. They tried to silence me, but my descendants speak. They tried to break me, but I survived. Remember my name. Remember what was done. Remember that truth cannot be buried forever. Grace stood before the statue, tears streaming down her face, and addressed the crowd. Samuel Rose has been gone for over 100 years, but he is not forgotten. His scars told a story that echoes across generations. His refusal to be erased inspires us to keep fighting for truth and justice. To everyone who has worked to restore his name, to honor his memory, to ensure his story is told, thank you. You have given my family an immeasurable gift. But more importantly, you have given Samuel what he fought his entire life to achieve, recognition of his full humanity. Acknowledgement of what was done to him, a place in history that cannot be taken away. She placed her hand on the bronze statue, on Samuel's raised wrists with their carefully sculpted scars. Samuel Rose was here. He mattered. He matters still. And as long as we remember, as long as we tell his story, as long as we fight against the systems that tried to destroy him, he wins. Truth wins. Justice wins. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus stood off to the side, watching Grace surrounded by her family, watching Samuel's bronze likeness rising against the Carolina sky. He thought about that day 10 years ago in the antique shop, how he'd almost missed the photograph, how easily Samuel's story could have remained hidden forever. But something had made him look closely. Something had made him see what others had missed for 170 years. The scars on a child's wrists, barely visible in an old photograph. Physical evidence of a truth that could not be denied, preserved by accident in an image meant to hide that very truth. Marcus had learned something profound through this journey. History is not just what is written down or officially recorded. History lives in photographs examined closely, in oral traditions preserved across generations, in the scars that bodies carry, in the descendants who refuse to let their ancestors be forgotten. Samuel Rose had been enslaved, tortured, sold, and erased from official records. But he survived. He had lived. He had told his story to his children, who told their children, who told theirs. And now, because of a researcher who looked closely at an old photograph, because of a descendant who recognized her ancestor's story, because of a community that demanded truth-telling, Samuel's name would live forever. Not as property in a ledger, not as the boy in a slaveholder's diary, but as Samuel Rose, a human being, a survivor, a witness to history whose testimony could not be silenced. As the crowd dispersed and evening fell over Charleston, Marcus took one last look at the memorial. Samuel's bronze face caught the last light of day, and for a moment Marcus could almost see the real Samuel, not the traumatized child forced to smile, but the man he became. The survivor who refused to hide his scars. The ancestor who made sure his story would outlive those who had tried to erase him. "We remember you, Samuel," Marcus whispered. "We will always remember you." And in the gathering darkness, the memorial stood as proof that some truths are too powerful to be buried. That some voices once silenced can still speak across centuries. That justice, though long delayed, can still be found. Samuel Rose's story had changed everything. Not just for his descendants, not just for historians, but for everyone willing to look closely at history and see what has been hidden in plain sight. The photograph that had tried to disguise slavery's horror had become testimony to its truth. The child who was forced to smile while wearing chains had spoken across 170 years. And his message was clear: remember me. Remember what was done. Remember that truth cannot be buried forever. The scars remain. The story lives. The name endures. Samuel Rose,